Hello and welcome to the next session of this long day, looking at certainly at media freedom, and that's what we're going to be looking at for the next hour, the role of governments in protecting media freedom. What more can the Media Freedom Coalition do? It's not just a technical question, it's also really a question about how the media is able to operate. Whichever kind of media you are, the real almost oppression, and I speak as a former broadcaster myself, when you think of the power of this, the mobile phone now, to be media anywhere. What role does that have? What kind of imposition is it creating on many governments? And what are governments doing to either make it possible for this to happen or make it more difficult when almost all of us have it? These are real paradoxes. There's a real conflict between the technology and the political imperative. And in many ways, despite what we've got in our hands and the ability of broadcasters and writing journalists to write so much from anywhere on anything at any time, it's now more difficult to do it. And we're seeing that at the moment, at this very moment in India, with the horror of the COVID-19 crisis and the attempts by the government to control information in a crisis, claiming that information about that crisis is fake news. Now, we don't want to get into fake news, but we do want to find out about the challenges of media freedom. And we're joined by 5 guests. And before we go to them, I want to encourage you to think in the next 55 minutes that you can contribute as well. So please, on the screen where you're looking at this, you'll find a place where you can go to log a question. The sooner you get the question to me, the sooner I can put it to our 5 guests. So don't leave it until the last moment and complain that I didn't hear from you. So that's the spirit. And let me introduce, first of all, from Costa Rica, we have Agustin Castro, who's the Minister of Communications for Costa Rica. That's because Costa Rica is number 5 in the Press Freedom Index. We have Rachel Kay as well, who is joining us from Toronto. She's Deputy Executive Director of IFEX. We have Dr. Bahia Tanziblir, welcome, the Human Rights Ambassador at the Foreign Ministry in the Kingdom of the Netherlands. Welcome from The Hague. And Farah Faisal, who's the High Commissioner of the Maldives to the United Kingdom. She's also, in other language, the Ambassador of the Maldives in several other countries across Europe. And finally, we have Patricia Campos Melo, who's a journalist from Sao Paulo in Brazil. She works for Folha de Paulo newspaper, Sao Paulo newspaper. And Patricia, I'm coming to you first, because very quickly, what I'd like you to do is tell us what it's like being a journalist where you work in Sao Paulo and the kind of real constraints and pressures that you're under.
Hi, Nick. Hi, everyone. Thank you for
Hello.
the opportunity to showing you what's happening in Brazil. Well, right now, we are facing 2 crises, the pandemic, which Brazil has the 2nd highest death toll of COVID-19 in the world, and a constant, permanent political crisis. So we as journalists, we face the old challenges, which is judicial harassment, difficulties to access information, and the challenges of reporting during a pandemic, and new kinds of challenges. For instance, with the internet, something that has become very, very common is the targeting of journalists online with defamation campaigns, character assassination, and basically labeling any kind of media that publishes critical reporting as unpatriotic media. So there's a campaign, a constant campaign by the government to say that the media is the enemy, that we're portraying a situation in a way that is really worse than it really is. And this is the opposite of what we're trying to do. We're trying to get information from the primary sources. For instance, it's become so difficult to get accurate figures of the pandemic here in Brazil because the government tried twice to manipulate statistics that media outlets had to form a consortium to gather information directly from the state governments to ensure that we have accurate information. Also, there's been many obstacles for us to use our Freedom of Information Act, which is to request original information from the government, but it's become very hard to get this information. I mean, they have been, blocking every kind of request, so this is also difficult. So when you combine these two things, we are fighting a pandemic, there's people dying everywhere, there's lack of oxygen, everything that that is happening in India as well, and the situation that there's a hostility towards journalists and media in general, because the government tries very hard to portray the media as enemy of the people, so to say, and to block us from getting, original or primary information from them. So I guess these are the main challenges, on top of, judicial harassment that's become worse, and all the other things.
Thanks, Patricia. That's a really sobering kind of insight into the kind of daily life that you and many of your colleagues in Brazil are having to endure. But it shows the ultimate conflict there is between the technology, which is allowing so much connectivity, but the political imperative in many countries, an increasing number of countries, to clamp down, which is why there is the Media Freedom Coalition. This was formed in 2019 by the UK and Canada. And that's what today is partly about. It's about celebrating the coalition, but also bringing to everyone's attention the fact that things are getting worse when they should be getting better. And I can already see 2 or 3 of our guests nodding in agreement there. This is the paradox which we want to get into in the next 50 minutes. We'd like to hear from you. Let me remind you, put questions or points that you'd like, particularly if you're a journalist, that I can hear from you about the kind of oppression that you're under, or the kind of things that you are enduring. But before I hear from our guests here, let's go to 2 foreign ministers, to the British Foreign Secretary Dominic Raab, and also to Mark Garneau, who's the Foreign Minister for Canada. First, Dominic Raab.
I'm very pleased to join you to celebrate the 30th anniversary of the Windhoek Declaration, which was a landmark statement on media freedom. The declaration outlines the fundamental importance of fostering and defending a free, independent media in building strong, open, democratic societies. And yet, as we mark this anniversary, we know that the situation has been deteriorating across the world in recent years. This has been made worse by the pandemic, which has provided unscrupulous regimes with an opportunity to shut down or intimidate the media. The International Press Institute has recorded 620 violations of media freedoms during the pandemic. And these violations range from censorship, restrictions on access to information, to arrests and verbal or even physical attacks on journalists. Many publications are contracting or even closing. Journalists are unable to find work because of falling revenues, and that's why the UK is more committed than ever to supporting media freedoms and journalists shining a light on abuses all around the world. And as co-chair of the Media Freedom Coalition, the UK is mobilising like-minded countries to stand up for these important rights. This global coalition now has 47 members, and it continues to grow. Together, we've issued public statements on media suppression in Uganda, China, Belarus, and Myanmar. We're also mobilising our local diplomatic networks to engage with governments around the world and challenge abuses when and where they occur. But of course, there's still much, much more to do. We've got to continue to call out the violations of media freedoms, both in public but also through our bilateral relations. We must work with civil society bodies and the high-level legal panel, which provides advice to governments to prevent abuses occurring and introduce legislation to protect journalists. And we must keep supporting UNESCO and the Global Media Defence Fund to give practical support to journalists when they're at risk. They fund some really important projects, like supporting legal clinics and other pro bono efforts to defend journalists whose rights are being curtailed, and supporting strategic litigation against laws and judicial practices which are aimed at attacking or reducing media freedoms. The UK is committed to supporting this fund over the next 5 years, and I urge others to do the same. Let's keep working together on all of these fronts to uphold the principles enshrined in the Windhoek Declaration and deliver greater safeguards for this vital pillar of our democracy.
Hello, it's a pleasure to join you in celebrating World Press Freedom Day. This year we mark a historic milestone, the 30th anniversary of the Windhoek Declaration. This declaration is one of the world's most important statements of press freedom. My thanks to Namibia and UNESCO for hosting the celebrations. Press freedom is vital to building more democratic and pluralistic societies where citizens are provided with the information to recognize problems, protect themselves, and hold governments to account. This is critically important in the midst of the global pandemic. Accurate and timely reporting is key to our ability to emerge and recover from this crisis. And yet, journalists and media outlets face unprecedented pressures, from shrinking revenue to online harassment and violence from autocratic governments. Women in the media face particular threats, from sexual harassment to intimidation and violence. We need to be doing more to protect women and bring those responsible to justice. Governments have a fundamental responsibility to protect press freedom, as well as the people who work in media, sometimes at great personal risk. Canada is committed to taking concrete action to protect them. Last year, we led on a progressive new resolution on access to information at the Human Rights Council, and we co-chair the Media Freedom Coalition alongside the United Kingdom. I'm encouraged that almost 50 countries have joined the coalition to speak out as one to protect media freedom around the world. Canada was proud to co-host with Botswana the second global conference for media freedom last November. And we will enthusiastically lend our support to Estonia, who will host the third conference later this year. In the meantime, we continue to work closely with partners at home and abroad to find ways to protect journalists and media workers, notably through our diplomatic networks to support those at risk. Canada also supports the work of the high-level panel of legal experts on media freedom and contributes to UNESCO's Global Media Defense Fund. Canada is committed to working with the international community on this important and urgent challenge. Thank you all for your commitment to press freedom. I wish you all the best in your efforts and look forward to hearing your ideas.
The foreign ministers there of Canada and the United Kingdom. So what we want to do in the next 50 minutes is really highlight and identify areas in which the Media Freedom Coalition can do more to promote and protect media freedom. And I think it's a salutary reminder. I remember working in Namibia during the days of SWAPO, when I could barely use a can of film. 30 years ago, the Windhoek Declaration, remember, it may have been a great statement of principle, but actually there was no digital, there was no 4G, there was no ability to use electronic. It was a very different environment in which they were able to bring that declaration to fruition like this, compared to where we are today with political pressures. Let's go to the Minister for Communications for Costa Rica, Agustin Castro. Agustin, welcome. Give us in 3 or 4 minutes maximum your perspective on why Costa Rica is number 5 in the Press Freedom Index. In other words, what kind of attitude have you created within government which makes that possible and makes it a paragon of media freedom?
Hi, Nick, and fellow colleagues on the table. Look, I don't believe that's a merit of the government. This is a merit of the country. Costa Rica has a very strong framework for protecting media freedom, for protecting freedom of expression and freedom of the press. That goes from the Constitution down. There is the constitutional clauses specifically related to that, and there are specific laws related to that, and there is a strong protection for those rights within the constitutional court that we have. So it's pretty common that journalists go to the constitutional court to defend their freedom of access to information and so on. There is a tension, of course. Sometimes they are right, sometimes they are not, but the point is that the legal framework provides for that. That's one part, very important part of the equation. Second one is the culture. The culture and the sociocultural factors are in this country tends to protect freedom in general. So the freedom of the press and freedom of expression are seen by people as part of their rights, and they demand that those rights are respected. So that creates an environment that leads to those freedoms being exercised vigorously by the people. Third, of course, is the that governments should follow a principle very important, is do not harm. And Patricia was mentioning the labeling that they suffer in their country, and the government resorting to say that ex-courage is unpatriotic or whatever like that, and you won't hear that here, because even if there are differences and there are critiques and so on, it's understood that freedom to criticize and so on is part of the rules, and is part of the democracy that is living, that people really lives in democracy. Third is for this, well, provide the info. As the report from media's freedom states, the pandemic made things worse for media in general. And Patricia was mentioning the problem they have to access to official numbers from the federal government and so on, and how they need to resort to build their own numbers, working with the state's governments and so on. Well, here we provide that info every day. Sometimes it's good info, sometimes it's really bad numbers. Right now we are in the midst of the third wave, and it's a very worrying one. But we don't hide the numbers. We show the numbers, and we try to give those numbers and a framework so that people know that this is bad. We need them to take care of themselves and so on. Because there's nothing to win to trying to hide the reality of it, if you have the hospitals full or how many deaths there are and so on. On the contrary, we try to use those numbers so that people knows the reality and tend to protect themselves, because that's a very important part of the equation here.
Agustin, I'm going to have to ask you this, if I may. Is there any pressure within your government to try and control the information in ways which could be seen as more sinister? Quickly, if you can.
Yes, we get that critique. There's people that don't believe in the pandemic. You know that there is people that ask, what pandemic? And they say that we try to use that as fear mongering. But no, the realities on the beds and the hospitals, or how many positive cases are there, are public.
All
because
right.
of that. We made that public, and even county by county, how many people is there that has the illness or is in the hospital and so on.
So, Agustin, could I ask you to pause for one moment, because I need to hear from everyone else, if I may, at this point. So thank you very much indeed, particularly underscoring that line that the Costa Rica, it's one of the rights of democracy to have media freedom. And literally, as you were speaking, there's a message here from Sheila Plata in the Philippines saying, I'm from the Philippines, where attacks on journalists are very rampant. If you are a critic of our current government, and therefore she's putting on the agenda for all of you how the international agencies, multilateral organizations should help the journalists being harassed by the state like that. In other words, the difference between protocol and diplomacy and the reality on the ground. And I think, Madam Ambassador, the Human Rights Ambassador from the Netherlands, Bahia Lee, can I ask you to pick up on that point for your 4 minutes, please?
Sure. So it's all about what governments can do more to support media freedom and to deliver information for the common good. And this is a very important point. And actually, it should be on the daily reminder and to-do list of all governments. And I would first like to say that I'm happy that the Media Freedom Coalition takes the lead to reflect on what governments, including its 47 members, can do more to support media freedom. In the interest of time, I'll highlight 2 concrete actions that require particular attention. First, to persuade more countries to effectively use and implement the international standards and apply the tools we already agreed on. And second, to encourage more countries to support an active, strong, and diverse civil society that speaks out. So the first point, it's really about aiming to bridge the gap between the commitments from governments and the ongoing media freedom violations. Governments can definitely make a greater and more conscious effort to comply with the media freedom standards and apply the rules they already agreed upon. So more action and implementation and more political will and ambition. And what is particularly very important and effective is the strengthened international cooperation and innovative multi-stakeholder partnerships, such as the Media Freedom Coalition, of course, because it gives us strength in number. And the coalition's added value is really the instant access to other governments and the ensuing discussions on cases of particular concern. So it puts us in a stronger position to take more effective action and have impact when we discuss cases such as in Yemen, the Philippines, and China. More countries, I would like to add, can lead with complementary initiatives to support media freedom. To this end, the Netherlands took a political initiative at the 2020 World Press Freedom Conference that it hosted last December. Almost 60 countries present endorsed a call to action to increase the safety of journalists all over the world. It's called the Hague Commitment, and it really hits the nail on the head, and it is global implementation is lacking, and more countries must be persuaded to effectively use the international standards, implement them, and apply the tools. So more colloquially put, governments need to take the gospel to the streets. And the Hague Commitment offers practical guidance, like just utilizing it also through the Universal Periodic Review, implement their commitments and co-sponsor relevant UN resolutions. We hope that this call will be honored by all countries around the world, because we cannot allow sticks and stones to break the bones of free press. Journalists supply the oxygen of free, inclusive, and informed societies. I would also like to share some exciting news. Tomorrow, the Netherlands will be launching the Global Drive for Media Freedom at the World Press Freedom Conference in Namibia. The Netherlands put significant funding into this effort and will be collaborating with UNESCO and OHCHR. And we're thrilled that these agencies will be undertaking media freedom activities in more than 22 countries. And we hope that these examples inspire more initiatives and positive forces. The second point is a bit shorter, is about civil society. That really also requires more governmental attention. Governments must go the extra mile to support civil society's fundamental role. It's vital to have a strong civil society that speaks out, because it is essential for a well-functioning, inclusive, and informed democracy. And it's incredibly important to listen to what civil society organizations are saying. And why? Because they know what is happening on the ground and what is really needed. We already discussed that civic space and media freedom are steadily shrinking, and that governments are cracking down on dissent, that many journalists are being threatened and killed every year. And especially women journalists are facing a lot of threats online. And some politicians, on top of all that, harm journalists with anti-media rhetoric. So we need governments more to speak out together on this trend and invest in strategic and innovative partnerships for media freedom. This is the ambition of the Netherlands, and we're on it every day and learning every day. Working with civil society, is our experience, makes us much more effective. I would like to give one concrete example of which I'm really proud. It's a multi-stakeholder partnership between the NGO Justice and Peace, the growing number of Dutch and international cities, and the Dutch Foreign Ministry. Through this innovative partnership called the Shelter City Program, the Netherlands is really making a real difference for civil society, and we're now creating extra capacity for journalists at risks. They come to the Netherlands, they stay in a shelter city, they obtain new ideas, renewed energy, and then they go back to their own country to continue their work. So taken together, what can governments do more? They can invest far more and more effectively in strategic coalitions such as the Media Freedom Coalition, but also strengthen innovative multi-stakeholder partnerships with civil society, because we are much stronger and more effective together. And I hope that could be our motto, because then we will really be able to make a change for media freedom, the safety of journalists. Thank you, Nick. Over to you.
Thank you, Ambassador. And Patricia, I'd like you to pick up on that, because in a moment, when we've heard from the High Commissioner, because obviously there's an interesting difference between the ambitions of what we've heard from the Ambassador and the reality that someone like you is facing, and we're already getting other comments as well about what other journalists are facing. And there is one question here: has the Media Freedom Coalition had any success since it was launched in 2019? So if you know of any success, please tell me, because certainly that's the view of Mary Myers, who's a researcher at the University of East Anglia. She would like to know if there has been any success. High Commissioner, let me come to you from the Maldives. Give me your view on how far this is moving and how successfully, if at all, it's moving. You're on mute, I'm afraid, Ambassador.
Hello. Yes, thank you very much. Maldives, of course, joined the Media Freedom Coalition in 2019 because we, believe very strongly in independent and free press. But before I talk about the Media Freedom Coalition, can I just throw in something from the perspective of a small state? I think the challenges we face as small states are sometimes very different to what the challenges journalists are facing in larger countries, and thank God in a way for that. But for example, what we face in small states is symptomatic of all small countries, I believe. That is because the environment they have to operate is not very free from each other. Let me explain. Maldives, Malaya capital, is less than 2 square kilometers. Now, almost everyone is connected to each other in a myriad of relationships. You went to the same school together, your neighbors, your parents knew each other, you could be related to each other. So in that kind of small knit communities, for journalists to write anything local is inevitably writing about something or someone that could be connected to you in a myriad of ways. So it's a very difficult environment sometimes they have to operate in. Difficult, but not dangerous in the sense of larger countries are facing, but sometimes it's a very difficult environment. And I can't foresee an easy way out of this, because this is basically symptomatic of being very small, communities. The Maldives joined the Media Freedom Coalition because we strongly believe that this is a place where we could promote the media, and we could get assistance to actually promote and help ourselves as well as others in facing and dealing with the challenges that we face. We have, had a lot of engagement with the Media Freedom Coalition, and I'm only speaking from the perspective of Maldives. Yeah, I do understand that, but we have been able to put forward several bills into the parliament, for example, a freedom of expression, freedom of press bill, and also introduced the Maldives Media and Broadcasting Authority bill. And so actually to build the legal framework that we need to help provide the media a free space for them to operate. So in that sense, for a small country like the Maldives, I think the Media Freedom Coalition is a godsend. Thank you.
Ambassador, thank you very much indeed. Let me just say, do please get your questions in. I've already got some here, but I'd love to have more if you want to put them through. And if anyone of our guests can answer the question about the successes, I'd like to hear from you in a moment. Now, Rachel Kay, joining us from Toronto, welcome. Just to explain what IFEX is, first of all, and then take it away with your view of whether there really is an upholding of media freedom at the moment.
Thanks, Nick, so much. And yes, IFEX is a global network of freedom of expression organizations, over 100 organizations in more than 70 countries. And we have the privilege of being one of the co-chairs, one of 3 co-chairs of the consultative network of the Media Freedom Coalition. The consultative network is made up of 17 members, and it was created back in January of 2020 to represent civil society organizations, media groups, journalists associations, and media development actors in the discussions and interactions with the coalition. And in thinking about, how we might actually work together more effectively with respect to what was spoken about in terms of government and the coalition itself and civil society that were raised by several of the distinguished colleagues here. I thought about what would be really important to first reflect on what the consultative network has done in this regard. And we've brought forward many cases of concern coming from countries where media freedom is at particular risk, and specific cases of individual journalists or media outlets under threat, knowing that an action from the MFC could have an impact. We've shared information on the case, along with clear recommendations on what the MFC can do to address it. And we've also channeled suggestions from CSOs and media and journalists on themes and actors to be part of the global conference that was referenced earlier, as well as provided feedback to the MFC on their documentation and their processes to inform and improve its functioning. 2020 was a very difficult year for everyone, and 2021 does not seem to be letting up. It's clear the constraints this has posed on governments and the coalition, as many have spoken about, and it has on our own organizations. And yet, as we've said, media freedom has never been more important. The members of the Media Freedom Coalition continue to have the responsibility of meeting the expectation to put media freedom as a priority in their agenda. And to achieve this, we really must continue to work together in the most effective ways to make this happen, as mentioned by Ambassador Bahia just a moment ago. I think for this, we have a few proposals. One is leading by example. Governments need to ensure their legislation, policies, and practices are in line with international human rights standards on freedom of expression, access to information, and media freedom. This was also mentioned by Minister Castro and Ambassador Bahia as being part of the solution. Lead, and others will follow. The Media Freedom Coalition is a perfect place for governments to support each other in this regard. And again, this was just mentioned by High Commissioner Farah as a benefit and a real, true purpose for being engaged in the coalition. It's really important, though, also for the members to hold each other accountable. They need to ensure that they have a strong peer review mechanism in place that enables the coalition to call out states that are not upholding the pledge they've committed to uphold. The coalition and those engaged need to ensure collective and coordinated action at the international level with other members to ensure rapid and effective responses. And at the local level, to ensure governments are connecting their embassies with other embassies, as well as with international and local organizations on the ground, particularly in emergency situations. We need to continue to improve communication with citizens via press releases and websites and other means. We need to use international fora like this panel to raise awareness about the importance of media freedom and what needs to be done. And we need to ensure transparent, timely, and clear communications with all stakeholders engaged directly in the Media Freedom Coalition. And most importantly, and I think Patricia spoke to this and is such a representative, we need to keep our focus on supporting journalists and media outlets at risk. We have to use all the tools in our collective toolbox to put pressure on states to uphold media freedom, provide funds and other support to address these cases, and promote the development of a strong, free media environment. This is where continued engagement with the consultative network on this is crucial, and I really appreciated Ambassador Bahia's comments on the importance of working with civil society. So let's remember that the MSC is a unique initiative that has brought together states committed to promote media freedom. It's the first of its kind and serves an example of a proactive coalition of like-minded people who can have an impact on keeping media freedom a priority. This takes work, as we know, and looking back at what we've done, which we will hopefully speak about shortly, Nick, as you've asked, we've taken steps together and found our footing. Now, with all this experience, we can find our stride. And if each member of the MFC commits to the work involved and makes media freedom and safety journalists a priority inside and outside their borders, that can happen. This way, I'm sure working together, we will find success. So thank you, Nick, and back to you.
Thank you very much, Rachel. Patricia, let me come to you. Given what you opened this discussion with, the kind of litany of oppression, really, how much does the principle of protocol and diplomacy that we're talking about, how much does that relate to what you're having to endure every day? If there were complaints, protests, representations about, say, someone like you to the Brazilian government by organizations internationally, would that make any difference at all?
Hi, Nick. Yes, I think that makes a huge difference. One thing is that here, we journalists on the ground, many times we're the only source for information that is being distorted by the governments. So it's us who are going to ICUs, who are, analyzing the budgets. And because we're doing this and we are going counter the narrative of the government that everything is really good, that there are no lack of resources, that the debts are subsiding, we are targeted as journalists. So this massive campaigns, it's not only online, it's really bad with women. There's a misogynistic aspect of it. There's always trying to portray female journalists there as offering sex and all this like really misogynistic things, and the media in general. So that it got to a point that there's like regular people on the streets that are attacking media people. There was a photojournalist last year covering one of the protests. He was punched and he was shoving. So because you say so many times the media is the enemy, the media is fake news, that people believe this and start attacking individual journalists. So when you have an institution or diplomacy, foreign policy, telling the world what is happening there, it's really important. At best, I mean, it could even make the government at least a bit uncomfortable about its image. So because many times we don't know what's happening in other countries, and supposedly Brazil is a democratic country. It is. We had elections, but the way that democracy is being eroded and also freedom of the press is being eroded is very insidious. It's very subtle, and when you realize what's happening, it might be too late. So it is essential that organizations shed light to what's happening in our countries.
Thank you. Let me ask who would like to come in. We have 25 minutes to run, so already the time is being eaten up, but we still got plenty of time to make sure we have a clear message and a clarity of understanding by the top of the hour here. Who would like to come in? Ambassador Bahia, would you like to come in? Do you believe you really have impact? Rachel, do you believe you really have impact? Because Patricia is saying, actually, if there are protests and there are representations, then that can make a difference. What's your experience, Ambassador?
So the question was related to let's say the effect or impact of the Media Freedom Coalition. Yeah, I can say from our perspective, we strongly believe in investing in such and joining such coalitions. Why?
But do you believe it has impact, or are you dealing
Absolutely.
with governments who believe they can get away with it with impunity?
Well, you cannot instantly change all governments. We all know that. But the fact that through the Media Freedom Coalition, our voices and our concerns are amplified 47 times, that is quite powerful. And also, we have been adopting statements on cases in Yemen, in the Philippines, China, situations of concerns in places such as Mexico, Belarus, and Uganda. It's quite different than having, for instance, only from the Netherlands or from the Media Freedom Coalition, including 47 member states. It really makes a difference. And we come from all different parts of the world, and we're small states, medium-sized states, and big states. So that is quite impressive. And I think also, this is only a very young coalition, which was established 2 years ago, but already we've had 2 ministerial conferences. We're bringing the whole world together, the civil society, other important organizations, the ministers.
But do ministerial conferences produce results which affect
Absolutely.
and make it easier for
Absolutely.
journalists?
Yes, because we made clear to governments who don't live up to the standards that we are a huge group, and that we are very firm in our beliefs, and that we really think something has to change. But of course, they don't change instantly, but they know that they cannot just go and do whatever they want and not be held accountable, or that they think that we don't see what they're doing. And another thing that we don't hear much about, one is loud diplomacy, and the other one is silent diplomacy, behind closed doors. And here also the Media Freedom Coalition has a very important role. And this, of course, we don't see, it's not visible, but sometimes that also leads to freedom of the detained journalists. So my country strongly believes in coalitions and that it has effects. We're stronger together. That's all that I can say.
Agustin, can I just ask you quickly, from your region, not necessarily in Costa Rica, do you believe that international pressure does have a significant impact on what some governments are doing? Think more broadly than just Costa Rica.
Yes, I will say that it's important because if you don't do that, it will seem that nobody cares, and that's okay. That's the normal rule or whatever. That's something that like the standard or that. And of course, governments are sensitive to the international punctuation. When
Even authoritarian governments, even
yes,
Belarus and
yes,
places like that.
Of course they don't give that much importance, but still they need some kind of relation with the outside world. And if you become like a kind of a lightning rod, you get into problems with in your diplomatic ties or in the help you receive. Many of the countries in this region do need international support.
All right. And Rachel, what's your experience, Rachel, quickly, of the after the representations you give?
In terms of the impact and action, I mean, I think that we're seeing as the coalition has been, moving ahead with different cases. I think we are seeing greater action on cases by the coalition, and I think that is demonstrating two things. I think one is that not just saying something and not just speaking out, but actually taking action on the ground that trying to affect does make a difference. I do think that the kind of action, as mentioned by the ambassador, around not just the public statements, but also that private bilateral diplomacy, and also when you have states, for example, instead of just doing one bilateral piece of diplomacy, if several states are doing that same bilateral diplomacy with the states, I think that could be a very powerful tool. I think really taking more advantage of the local missions that countries have in situations where things are extremely challenging and where they could benefit from raising awareness and providing that support. I think that Patricia talked about really shedding light on what's happening, that these are some of the only people that are able to speak out, and if they're not if their situations are not raised and if there's not visibility to them, that really does, put them at more risk, and I think is challenging.
Well, let's please, High Commissioner.
Can I just add something to that? I mean, we are talking of Media Freedom Coalition versus the rest of the world, but let us look at inside the Media Freedom Coalition, the member countries itself. By being part of that coalition, it gives us you look inwards and see what are the things you are doing wrong and what are the things you need to correct yourself. So it being part of the coalition is also gives you strength to actually change whatever and learn from each other, and make your own regulations and create better place for your own journalists to work within. So let's not just look at from what Media Freedom Coalition versus the rest of the world. Let's also look at what the member states are doing among ourselves. I mean, let me just again give you an example from the Maldives. We joined Media Freedom Coalition in 2019, and from we've moved 48 places on the World Press Freedom Index now, because we learn from the other countries, we learn from each other's experience. So it's also within ourselves that we have a chance to better create an environment for our own journalists.
Tremendous. Okay, well, look, let me just see if we can go to a representative from the British Foreign Office, Kanbar Hussain Bohr, who is Media Freedom Coordinator, because this is about data. And I thought this question would come up, so I asked if someone from the Foreign Office could be available. Would you like to, Kanbar, just pick up, particularly on that question from the University of East Anglia, from Mary Myers, about successes, given what your Foreign Secretary was saying earlier?
Yes, thank you very much, Nick. We've heard some very eloquent interventions from the Ambassador from the Netherlands and the High Commissioner from the Maldives. I'll just build on that. Two very key points, really. One is the international advocacy is really crucial. Prior to the formation of the coalition, there hadn't been the profile on media freedom, but since its creation, the international advocacy has really increased. We've had a number of statements of particular countries of concern, and we know offline from our post on the ground that the countries in question, they listen, they hear, and often they don't like it. That means that there's a reaction. But also we're very keen on international action. what can we do to actually support media freedom on the ground? And for example, here in the UK, we've recently passed a national action plan ourselves. That's primarily because we want to lead by example and our commitment and the pledge of the Media Freedom Coalition. We know other countries are doing that as well. We also have been working very closely with UNESCO on the Global Media Defence Fund, which last year, in its first tranche of funding, has supported over 1,000 journalists on the front line. And finally, the high-level legal panel has produced a number of recommendations which many states, including ourselves, have adopted, and we know that that means that the media legal environment is improving. My final comment on this is that the Foreign Secretary noted there is much to do. We are a young organisation, we are learning all the time, we are growing all the time, and our commitment to improve remains there. So we will take on board all the reflection and feedback I have, and we will be redoubling our efforts to ensure that the impact can be sustainable. Thank you.
Thanks, Kenbar. And just as you were speaking, we've got a message here from Maureen Nkandu saying that international pressure does have a bit of impact in that oppressive governments realize that there is focus on what is going on in their countries. They take note that they cannot get away with it, but when the noise is quietened, they really don't care. Patricia, let me come to you as an active journalist. If your case was to be highlighted, how might that be? How might the authorities, those with more sinister intent, how might they react to that, given the kind of government that you have and the kind of president that you have and the kind of environment you have, quite apart from the COVID problem?
Difficult question. Well, of course, populist governments, they tend to use whatever international criticism or comments as a unifying thing and portray as the, common enemy, someone who's trying to interfere with our sovereignty. But in the case of journalists, and here, I mean, in my particular case, when the government started, government and followers and ministers started attacking me, basically using sexual language, this shed light to what was happening to like many female journalists in Brazil. And you had many international organizations saying, this is what is happening. Brazil is a democracy, but this is how they're trying to intimidate journalists, specifically female journalists. And we have not had a backlash from the government yet. The government is using this legislation of national security against several journalists. But I think that the fact that there's been international criticism, unlike what is happening with the Amazon, which in the beginning, they would use criticism as, a way of saying this is people trying to interfere with our internal matters. With journalism, they are basically just saying that the whole world is communist and that's why they are criticizing, but they haven't been able to galvanize people around this idea. He has not been able to use this as an excuse to, crack down on the media even more. So, I mean, overall, I think it is very important because, as I was saying, otherwise people have no idea what is happening. I mean, you think a country is democratic, and it is democratic, but it is gradually, there's being like an erosion of this democracy and of freedom of the press. And the only way this can be known is if you shed light on this.
But let me just follow up, and I'd like to get the reaction of everyone else. But the kind of work you're doing on disinformation, misinformation, the abuse of WhatsApp, this is a whole different environment in which all journalists are working, where so much can be transmitted, but so much can be violated and so much can be challenged, and there can be so much manipulation as well. Do you believe it's possible still to uphold the ultimate principles of good journalism, and that can be protected by an international coalition?
I think we're all trying to figure out how to make accurate information and good journalism go viral, because at this point we're losing the battle against disinformation. Professional journalists are the only ones that are avoiding people to live literally in alternative universes. I'll give you an example about Brazil. Brazil is one of the only countries in the world where millions of people are still using hydroxychloroquine and other medications that are totally useless against COVID. And why is this happening? Because there's a communication strategy, disinformation strategy from the government to keep these people in alternate realities. What we can do, and with the support of coalitions such as the Media Freedom, is make our journalism and accurate information more powerful so that it reaches a wider audience. This is the big challenge. And for that, we need two things. We need to be able to work. We need to be able to, look into the documents, analyze budgets, go into ICUs, go into homeless shelters, everything, not block the access, and also have strength, be it financial, be it institutional, to make this go to a wider audience, to try to not to keep it in the bubble of people who actually pay attention to fact checking, right? In that sense, I think, yes, it is essential.
Thanks, Patricia. That phrase you used, how to get good information to go viral, that really is indicating really that there's a significant oppressive problem here. Agustin, you wanted to come in.
Yes, Nick, because this subject is very important, because the people is the ultimate victim of this fake news and so on, this alternative universe that Patricia was saying. And we suffer that a lot also because the pandemic, sometimes you need to take some measures, let's say. And then suddenly there is a WhatsApp chain there saying that you are going to do this, that, and so on. And this is totally fake. But people tend to believe that. And yes, the war with the media and the journalists, the professional journalists, is the only wall that there is, like, to try to prevent that from becoming the reality. And so we tend to work a lot with the media here in collaboration to try to clarify those fakes. It's every day. It's kind of like every day there's something going around. And unfortunately, sometimes the media is also victim of that because they get those and they try and they in trying to get some news in advance of their competitors, they tend to publish and so on. It's very difficult, yes, to get to the people real information about that. And I can only imagine the difficulties when the government is trying itself to push other realities also. So this is a very rich subject that needs to be delved into.
Right, we've got 10 minutes maximum left. What I'd like to do is keep taking it forward in the spirit of 2 years ago and the Windhoek Declaration. What has to be done next at a time when life is getting ever more difficult for journalists, those who can actually do journalism and who can afford to do it, working for an organization which might have some money? I'm very struck particularly by the absolute conflict that we've seen in Myanmar between a government trying to create martial law, but actually a public which is determined to make sure that the world can see what is happening. I did a big study for the Reuters Institute 13 years ago, where the Myanmar government complained about emails, complained about cameras, complained about camera phones, saying they were producing not fake news, but they called it a sky full of lies. And that's a mindset that you're seeing in far too many countries at the moment. Ambassador, can I come to you first of all? Ambassador in the Netherlands, what do you believe needs to be done? And I'd like to ask all five of you, what needs to be done? What's the message to the two foreign ministers which their officials can take forward? Ambassador.
Keep on investing in the Media Freedom Coalition, but also to bring documents such as the Windhoek Declaration, the UN Plan of Action, and the Hague Commitment to life. We already have the standards, we already have the tools, we already have practical guidance that we all agreed on. We have to bring it to life. So we need to start doing what's in these documents. And I think also not only to think in doom scenarios, but I just want to recall last year at the UN Human Rights Council, after a lapse of 11 years, we finally managed, as a UN Human Rights Council, to adopt a very strong resolution with normative norms that journalists are using now. And this is also something that we can, use and also follow up on and monitor and everything. So we need to not constantly create more, but we need to start doing what is there.
But what do you do about
be the
China?
example.
What do you do about China? What do you do about Russia? I think of the BBC correspondent who had to leave to go to Taiwan because of oppression, because of all he revealed about the Uyghurs and then Xinjiang and so on. That became impossible, and he was harassed and had to leave.
Yeah, of course, we cannot always, get the result that we want to have, but we can put all our effort into it and do our very best. And then, if the result doesn't come, it's not our failure, it's that government's failure, but it gives that journalist strength and all the journalists in the world. Because if they see that we don't do anything, what about the journalists in Sudan or the journalists in Turkey or in Syria or whatever, We give them strength, we give them a face, we give them a voice. And that is really all about our work. We cannot guarantee the result, but we can do our very best. And this is why we are together and we work together.
Right, we got 5 minutes to go. Rachel, what's your message of what has to be done? It is not a lost cause. It is a cause which is building, you're saying.
Yes, and I think that it really goes back to the first and last thing I mentioned earlier. Lead by example. Really demonstrate, as both the ambassador and the high commissioner spoke about, really leading by example as a government. And then I think on the other side, keeping that focus on supporting journalists and media outlets at risk, because I think without really trying to do whatever you can, even in circumstances so dire as you talked about, Nick, then really we're not going to be able to affect or have any impact on
High
changing
Commissioner,
that.
your message. High Commissioner, your message.
Thank you. I'm a firm believer of bettering yourselves. And I think the Media Freedom Coalition need to expand, because when you are a member of such a body, such a coalition, you are forced yourself to do better for your own journalists. And I think the wider, the bigger we grow, the more stronger we become. And the countries themselves have to turn their own, look at themselves and create a better environment for their own journalists to work. And I think this way we can grow and create a better place for all the journalists of the world. I think that is the key. We need to slowly expand, slowly grow, and make our own members accountable.
Well, that's tremendous. We have a message here from the future ambassador of the United Kingdom to Albania, a country I remember for many years I could never get into because of the obvious problems there. But he says he's going to Albania as British ambassador. How do the panel recommend the coalition encourage countries like Albania that have expressed an interest to join the coalition, but also have some challenges around media freedom and a need to translate positive intent into real change on the ground? Alistair, I don't think we're going to get an answer for you, but at least I put it on the agenda to take away with the recording of this panel. Agustin, and I'll come to Patricia last. Agustin, what's your message about what has to be done to make sure there's momentum and increased momentum for the coalition?
Well, I think that if you believe in something, you need to fight for it. And that's the measure, because of course there can be setbacks. Of course, you can always say, well, is gonna Lukashenko care about something? Well, so are you gonna shut your mouth? No. So that's the message, I think. And then how you can create a better framework for those freedoms, for freedom of expression, freedom of press. Can you push that in different countries? Could you look to promote some legislation that could create a better environment for the exercises of those freedoms? That's something that you can do in the positive, not just in the denouncing, but also in the promoting of something that do a better framework for the freedom.
Thank you, Agustin. Patricia, last word from a working journalist and a journalist under immense pressure. Do you see, quite apart from whether there's going to be political change in your country, do you see the situation you described an hour ago as probably getting worse? before there's any chance of it getting better? Or can the coalition have an impact? In other words, should the message go back through The Hague and elsewhere that actually more pressure on Brazil means your life might be a lot easier or a bit easier?
I do think that things are going to get worse before they get better, because the political crisis is really getting worse here. And I do think that maybe if freedom of the press were one of the clauses, so to say, that emerging countries had to fulfill, like a commitment they had to fulfill to get accepted, let's say, to OECD or to other bodies, to other institutions. If freedom of the press were officially something that you had to have to be accepted into institutions, maybe that would be more effective, more enforceable, on top of pressure. I do understand that putting pressure on governments is a very sensitive issue regarding freedom of the press, but I think that maybe these two things, international pressure from the coalition, and some sort of, you have to have some XYZ commitments on freedom of the press to be accepted into the OECD, for instance, or other organisms or institutions. That could be also useful.
Thank you, Patricia, and thank you all very much indeed. I hope what we've done is give you some clear idea of the real pressures that are on journalists, but the real determination of at least 47 countries to move things in a very significant way. I, as a partial working journalist now, do though feel pretty skeptical that there are those out there who feel they can act with impunity. And therefore my message to both the British Foreign Office, the Canadians, the Dutch, the Maldivians, and everyone is it's going to, I think, be a much tougher journey than probably anyone has really worked out, simply because many governments believe they can get away with this at the moment, tragically. And that's the paradox when we've all got an iPhone to report ourselves with whichever platform we can use. So thank you all very much indeed. From me, Nick Gowing, I hope we've enlightened you on the real challenges, but the possibilities that media freedom can be created at least a little more visibly than it is in some places at the moment. Bye-bye.